Today we're going to talk about adding a cover crop to a corn and soybean rotation. If you notice, throughout the winter time, especially in Iowa and throughout the Midwest, a lot of the soil is uncovered and bare. And that offers a lot of opportunity for nitrogen to leave the system, to be leached through water loss and soil loss, and also phosphorus attached to that soil can leave our fields. So one way to decrease our soil loss and improve our use of nitrogen and keeping it in the system is to add a cover crop to our fields. Now, some people think that it's a little busy in the fall after we've harvested, after we've done field work, to add a cover crop to be able to plant it at that late date. So there's sort of two options if we want to try to add a cover crop in the fall. We can overseed a cover crop into a standing corn or soybean crop using an airplane, a helicopter, or using a modified highboy or detasseling machine. And so these tools allow us to overseed with maybe a broadcast seeder over the canopy and get the seed into the standing crop, and then through wind and rain, that seed wiggles its way down to the soil surface. If you want to plant at that time of the year and overseed into a standing crop, you could do it right before soybean yellowing, before leaf drop of soybeans, or at corn black layer, which usually is sometime during the end of August, up until September 15th in central Iowa. There are several pilots throughout Iowa that are able to do this. They can switch over from applying pesticides with their wet units and put on the dry box to be able to plant those cover crops into standing corn or soybeans. If you're using a plane to aerial seed your cover crop, it's critical that you time the seeding with potential rainfall or moisture that might be coming. If you've had a wet late summertime, there's probably enough moisture in the soil surface that once the seed hits the soil, it's going to be able to germinate. But if it's been dry, it's really important to make sure that the plane seeding is timed with moisture. Now, the seed can sit on the soil surface for 2 weeks, and if it gets a rain in those 2 weeks, it'll pop and it'll germinate and it'll take off. But beyond 2 weeks, it gets kind of tricky that some seed might not germinate. So the worst case scenario would be that you would overseed using the airplane, it would get a little bit of rain, but that it had been a dry year and there isn't a lot of soil moisture to help it stay germinated, and it could die. But in the past seasons that we've had enough moisture that at the time of late August to September 15th, there's enough rain that you can time the seeding with rainfall. This it really works and allows us to get a good stand and get it out of the way so that when we're done with fall harvest, we just have a beautiful green crop. If you want to plant into standing corn or soybeans, you should plant 50% higher rate. So for winter rye, which is normally planted at about a bushel per acre if you're drilling, you would want to plant at 1.5 bushels or 2 bushels per acre into that standing corn or soybean crop. We've seen good luck, good stands with overseeding, and we'd like to encourage it and think it's a really good practice to be able to get it out of the way. Now, if you do fall tillage, you will have a cover crop in the way following corn or soybean harvest. But one way to get around doing full fall tillage would be to use strip tillage. So some farmers are flying a cover crop into standing corn or soybeans 1st of September, and then strip tilling following harvest, and also applying maybe P and K at that time. So that allows some sort of hybrid of the system where we're not doing full fall tillage, but we're still getting a cover crop in the system and doing strip tillage. So we're just leaving a little strip black in the fall, putting our nutrients there if we want to, and then the rest is green. And so that allows us to hold that soil and keep those nutrients in place so that next year we can take advantage of those nutrients that didn't leach out through rain or snow melt. So overseeding is one option. Now, if you're not able to overseed, if you don't have access to a pilot, although there are 18 pilots in Iowa that are available, but if you don't have access to that, then you could still drill after corn or soybean harvest. If you want to make sure that you get it in timely, you need to follow the combine with the drill. So you can use any sort of no-till drill, a planter, put the seed in the box and hook it up to the tractor and follow that combine. Don't let any time lapse between harvest and planting of the cover crop. But the point is to get it done quickly in the fall because there's not a large window. Most small grains like winter wheat, winter rye, winter triticale, or winter barley really need to be planted before November 1st in central Iowa. If you're able to get it in following soybean harvest, you have more time usually because those are harvested much earlier than corn grain. So following corn grain, you really need to be following the combine if you want to add a cover crop to your system. But it's completely possible. Lots of farmers in Iowa are now using this practice, and it's being done well, and the stands are good. Another option in the fall might be oats as opposed to an overwintering small grain like winter rye, winter barley, winter triticale, or winter wheat. Oats need to be planted before November 1st, but then throughout the winter they'll die, and they won't be there in the spring, and so you won't have to kill them in the spring. They'll provide half the benefits of the overwintering cover crops, but also you won't have to deal with them in the spring. So if you're just thinking about getting used to a cover crop and trying it in your corn and soybean rotation, we suggest at least trying oats. Oats will provide those benefits of pulling and holding the nitrogen that would have leached and also keeping the soil in place and decreasing the opportunity for it to erode through wind and water erosion. Other mixes have been tried like hairy vetch and winter rye, overseeded into corn and soybeans or planted after harvest. Hairy vetch is a legume, and it does very well in central Iowa before November 1st, more around October 10th to 15th if it can be planted earlier. And hairy vetch allows more nitrogen to be made available next spring to your following crop. It does overwinter also. It could have a problem of hard seed, which means that some seed may not germinate in the fall, and then in the spring it would germinate and could become a weed. But if you're using any sort of glyphosate product, then you should have no problem killing it in the spring. Some other crops that farmers are interested in using have been the tillage radish or oilseed radish or some of the brassicas. Those crops really need to be planted following wheat or rye or oat harvest, which happens in July usually in central Iowa. They need much more time to grow, about 60 days before a hard frost, and access to good sunlight. Now we are doing some experiments with more shade-tolerant brassicas, and so look for those just in case they come along. Then you could overseed those brassicas into corn and soybeans. If you're using a shorter season soybean, then you probably have enough time to plant it in the fall and then have enough growth to where you would get the large tuber, which is what those are known for. The brassicas decompact the soil by producing this large tuber that breaks up the soil in the fall. And then it stops growing and then dies in the spring and starts decomposing. And so you're left with some holes in the ground, but I've seen farmers no-till drill into those or drill into those without any spring preparation, and so there's no problem with that. So if you're looking to add a crop like a brassica to your farming system, you would need either a really short season soybean, possibly following corn silage, but we know that it for sure works following small grain harvest, which usually happens in July. So those are some options of cover crops and ways to add them to a corn and soybean system. Two places where cover crops could be added easily would be following corn silage harvest. So corn silage in central Iowa usually happens September 15th. There is plenty of time to get out there and drill a winter small grain or mix of winter small grain and hairy vetch following corn silage harvest. And because you'd have such a good stand in the fall, you may be able to graze it. This cover crop right here is oats, and it was planted a couple weeks before a typical corn silage harvest here in central Iowa. but we would expect growth similar to this following corn silage harvest. And this has the potential to be grazed on those acres. So farmers that are feeding cattle and have corn silage in their system should be adding a cover crop to that system, not only to cover the soil, but also to take advantage of grazing potential or silage potential to add to the ration. A shorter season soybean or shorter season corn is also another option where you could drill following early harvest. Any seed beans or seed corn that's taken off early also has the opportunity to be followed by a cover crop. These shorter season systems definitely need to be covered in the fall because there's such a large window of bare soil. So to add a cover crop to corn and soybean systems, there is a cost. But over time, the investment of that cost will be reaped in better, stable corn yields, keeping the soil on your ground and not giving it to your neighbors, and also keeping nitrogen and phosphorus in the system. So the cost to overseed using an airplane is ranging from $8.50 an acre to up to $15 an acre. The cost of using an airplane depends on how close you are to a landing strip, how fast you're able to load the seed using a wagon with an auger versus totes, and what planting rate you're using, which depends on what seed you're using. So if you're using a winter small grain, you're probably planting at 1.5 bushels per acre. And depending on how far you are from the landing strip will determine how many runs the pilot has to make back and forth. But we're seeing the average cost of overseeding for the pilot's time and cost of the airplane at about $9 to $15 an acre. The cost of a winter small grain ranges in that same range, about $9 to $12 an acre. Sometimes you can find farm-produced cover crop grains at much lower cost, and that is a good opportunity to get a cover crop into your system at a cheaper rate. But those who don't have access to that and who are going through seed houses will find the seed being about $9 to $12 an acre in 2010. The legumes are a little bit more costly. Hairy vetch and other legumes can range from $1.60 to $3.20 a pound, and you'd want to plant at about 15 pounds per acre. The brassicas are around $3.20 a pound, and you'd want to plant at about 8 pounds per acre. So the average cost of doing an aerial seeding might range about $25 to $30 an acre. Drilling, depending on if you own the driller, if you need to contract that service out, usually costs about the same as using the pilot. So we assign the same costs as about $25 to $30 an acre, whether you're drilling or using a pilot to overseed. If you'd like to use a modified highboy or look towards your co-op to do something with fertilizer application, we've heard that sometimes the seed can be mixed into fertilizer and the co-op will seed for free based on the cost of purchasing the fertilizer from them, and then you bear the cost of the seed. So there may be synergies out there through working with co-ops or pilots or other service providers to be able to get the cover crop planted at a reduced cost. If you have any more questions about planting cover crops into standing corn or soybeans, or following shorter season crops, or following harvest of grains, please contact Practical Farmers of Iowa or the Iowa Learning Farms to learn more.